it's my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Donna Marsh O'Connor. On September 11th, Ms. O'Connor tragically lost her daughter, Vanessa, in the attacks. Soon after, she helped found the group September 11th for Peaceful Tomorrows, September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrows, and has been an outspoken member of the peace community ever since. She has been involved in much public debate and activities surrounding events related to 9/11 and U.S. foreign policy since. In 2010, she spoke in defense of a proposal to build an Islamic community center near Ground Zero in New York. Please join me in welcoming Donna Marsh O'Connor onto the stage.
I have absolutely nothing big to say. And there's a part of me that thinks I have nothing left to say, but I will say thank you to Broome County Peace Action and to Binghamton University Peace Action and to Caleb Schwartz and Jack Gilroy for putting this together. I am not one of the founders of September 11th Families for Peaceful Tomorrows. I wish I had been. At the time, the group was started by, I believe, Adele Welty, Rita Lazar, David Patorti, Terry Rockefeller. I was not one of the early members. I was a relative latecomer. For me, 9/11 was not something that happened in the past, and it sort of strikes me that I believe I am just still a little kid from the Bronx. And I just found out that Ray is also a little kid from the Bronx, so only he's much more of a grown-up to me. So a little bit about Peaceful Tomorrows. They are a group of family members who came together in the early days after 9/11 because they wanted to, I believe, recuperate their family members' names from the use of those names for war. And so the primary message of Peaceful Tomorrows is, you know, the greatest crime against me doesn't justify my perpetrating crimes against others. It is such a simple message, and yet it is probably the one that has been the most difficult in the post-9/11 days to drive home. And particularly for me, a person who was changed by the events of that day. And despite the fact that there's been this great cleansing of Lower Manhattan, for me, the most important view of Ground Zero was in the days just following. In the days when family members were protected from all of the PCBs that were in the air. And so I remember in the early days wanting desperately to find my kid. And, you know, as any mother knows, and when I dropped her off the first day at kindergarten, I knew I was going to have a hard time finding her when I picked her up at 3 o'clock. And sure enough, somehow she slipped right by me and went across the street to some boy's house. I would have ripped apart every apartment building in the Bronx to find her. And that was my instinct on 9/11, that the only place I wanted to be was in that dirt pile of fire and ash and steel. And for me, and I still sometimes can't believe that I think this, those Gothic black beams that stood up from Ground Zero were to me the only comforting sight on earth, because she, I believed, was still there. And of course, we were prevented from going to the site for our own good. And I will never forget the first time we were driven there. by very generous police officers who knew they need to see it. And we took a few turns. I can't even tell you what streets that would have been now. And I looked at office buildings that were sheared off, and it was like looking into a dollhouse. Mounds and mounds of earth, gray, black earth, with fire engines that looked like they were only 10 feet away, but they were this big. So the scale of this horror was something that, as a child, in my wildest nightmares, I never could have anticipated would actually happen to my own child. I am not away from that site. I have never been to the 9/11 museum. I have not been to the beautiful fountains where people have taken pictures of her name with roses on them and sent them to me, and I appreciate that. But a cleansed view of what happened, I think it's too early for a cleansed view. It's stunning to me when I walk into a classroom to teach on the first day of the semester now that many of my students were 3 to 5 years old on the day of 9/11. And yet, like, they still have some sort of vestige of whatever a collective memory would be. And I really dread the day when they don't remember that. I have been to the Katrina Museum. We had one thing in common with Katrina victims that struck me as I was going to give a talk in 2005 on the anniversary, and that was that after Hurricane Katrina hit, many of the bodies of the people who drowned in their own attics, and that was really hard for me to sort of get my mind around, that, my kid died in fire and steel and the most crushingly for her beautiful buildings on earth. And there were people in our nation who drowned in their attics. And what struck me was listening to the reports of the bodies being held in a place where people could not go and identify their loved ones' remains. And Vanessa was lucky. She was pulled from the pile on September 24th. We were not notified until the first Monday in January, and I knew I was going to get the call that day, and I've written about this, and right now my interest is more in what actually happened to my daughter in the last moments, but also in the last years of our life together. So I no longer really think of myself as a peace activist. I never really wanted to be an activist. I wanted to be a lazyist. I love my kids. I loved playing with them and taking them to water. I loved lecturing them. I loved bossing them around. And I loved having a grown daughter who would cook for me. And in the days just following, I could not believe, I just could not believe what was being done in her name by our government all over the world. And I could not believe that everyone in this country did not see exactly what I was seeing. And then I remember one day driving home from New York. And in those days, I don't think I really walked, I think I floated. I don't know that my feet really touched the ground. I was driving home and I had not been able to listen to music in a long time because I never knew what triggers would come on that would just, I'd lose it. And so I was listening to an NPR station and I heard this really amazing guy. And his name was Ray McGovern. And he was talking about the Bush administration. And everything that I had guessed, little stupid kid from the Bronx, was being articulated in this sound, calm, sober, grown-up way. And I was hearing that nowhere else. We had gone from, CNN and our local news, to MSNBC, Fox News, where we can select our flavor of news of the day, to 24/7 broadcasts about what happened on 9/11. Our television screens were filled with images. In boxes, thank you so much, next to the television screens were the graphics we were to read, and the scroll underneath was all of that important data, and it changed forever how we consumed news. News became not only entertainment, it became our right to have it delivered in the flavor of the day that we chose. And here was this man who was saying things that I think everyone in America needs to hear. Today, Ray asked if he showed a video if I would find it disturbing. I find everything disturbing nowadays. There's a part of me that I will say, I want my daughter back. I want my country back. And so it's better for me as a parent, as a citizen of this nation, as a person who once considered herself the stupidest patriot on earth. I couldn't listen to America songs without sobbing, to a point now where I just want to stop using the word freedom and liberty without actually demanding that I have some. So I would really like to turn the floor over to Ray McGovern, because I think he is the person we all need to hear. And I really want to thank you in public for being you and for carrying on and telling the truth about everything. So thank you.
I'm reminded of a priest friend of mine, a really bright guy. He was a Rhodes Scholar, and he studied real hard, and he was giving his first Mass. And he had his homily sermon really just down pat, and everything was good because the congregation knew all the responses, forever and ever. Amen. Lord be with you. Also with you in those days. So everything was going swimmingly. He got up and he looked at his homily, and then he spoke it to the mic, and it didn't seem to be working. And he, without thinking, says, "There's something wrong with this damn thing." And also with you was the immediate response. We have to try to keep we have to try anyway, keep some sense of humor here. I can't tell Donna how much I appreciate her coming here, and it's not only that she's a full professor, but that she's from the Bronx, and we have so much in common. We grew up maybe, a mile and a half from each other, and we can both speak Bronx if we need to. So there's an affinity there that is just really sacred and blessed, and we both know where we're coming from, and we haven't forgotten, and we may go back. So it's fallen to me to talk about what happened after 9/11, and it's no fun to say these things because, as Donna said, one likes to be proud of our country and our leadership. But you've heard the expression quite often and you can actually repeat it after me, or complete the sentence for me, that'd be better. After 9/11, everything changed, right? Okay. So, before 9/11, we didn't like Iraq much. We had actually imposed hard sanctions on Iraq, killing 500,000, like 500,000 children under the age of 5. The Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, when she was asked about that, whether she thought that was worth it, she said, yeah, we think it's worth it. So there had been a long history of enmity between our two countries, but we didn't really consider them a threat to the United States. I mean, after all, look at the map, or look at the globe, you know. And did they have weapons of mass destruction? Well, that would be a stretch, because the UN thought all those weapons of mass destruction had been destroyed after the first Gulf War. So what happened was this. Just a brief word about before 9/11. In late February of 2001, Colin Powell got up and he said, Saddam Hussein has no weapons of mass destruction. He's not a threat to anybody. Saddam Hussein has no weapons of mass destruction. February 22nd, 2001. July 30th, 2001, Condoleezza Rice at a Sunday talk show said, Saddam Hussein is not a threat even to his immediate neighbors. We have been able to keep his weapons from him. Now, that was July 30th. So fast forward through August and the first 11 days of September 2001, my math is right, that's about 6 weeks. So here we had a situation where literally everything changed, because what we are being asked to believe was that 6 months before 9/11, Saddam Hussein not only had no weapons of mass destruction, was not even a threat to his own neighbors, and all of a sudden, after 9/11, weapons of mass destruction descended like manna from heaven for a soft landing on the sands of Iraq, where God made that terrible decision to put our oil. You can't get weapons of mass destruction in 6 weeks or 6 months. It takes 6 years maybe. So, you know, you didn't have to be an intelligence analyst to figure out there's something wrong here, to smell a rat. And sure enough, the rat really smelled. What happened, of course, was that the Episcopal Diocese of Washington was persuaded to let George Bush speak from the National Cathedral, and he said, in effect, vengeance is mine, say I, George W. Bush. Everybody's going to feel what we have to dish out. He said that several times. In other words, instead of appealing to the best instincts of Americans, he appealed to the worst ones. And then we had Afghanistan, and then we had Colin Powell going before the United Nations. Now, he claims he was lied to by the intelligence, and that's true. But Colin Powell had been around for decades. You can tell when you're being lied to. He wanted to play the game. They thought that by attacking Iraq, it would be, one of them said, a cakewalk, you know, a piece of cake that'd come in, would be welcomed by the Iraqis with bread and salt, and everything would be hunky-dory. As you all know, that's not the case. And I had a chance to challenge the Secretary of Defense, Donna Rumsfeld. I was going to show the clip tonight. It was 10 years ago. It was 2006, and I happened to be in Atlanta at the same time he was, and I wangled a ticket through some very courageous women in the world can't wait to get in to hear him. And there was a very interesting setting. It was a very white, well-heeled, Southern, defense-friendly think tank. Matter of fact, I couldn't even get a ticket off their website. I had to go through World Can't Wait women who know how to get things done, like many other women who are fighting for justice. So I'm sitting there, and Rumsfeld, the first thing he says is, you know, I don't like the protesters that are out there. And there were some protesters saying, Rumsfeld, war criminal. Rumsfeld, war criminal. And they were immediately attacked by these people, and the banners seized, and Rumsfeld looks and he says, you know, I have to tell you that that kind of thing deprives the government of the trust that it needs from the citizens to govern. And I'm sitting there. You know, this is the guy who lied us into 9/11. So he made the mistake of saying, you know, apparently there were no weapons of mass destruction. And in the question and answer period, I had a chance to say, well, you said you knew where they were. So I did not. I said, we knew that approximately. I said, no, you said you knew where they were, in and around Tikrit, Baghdad, and east, west, north, and south. That's exactly what you said. No, I didn't say that. Then a black-hatted guy comes down, and he sticks his elbow into my solar plexus, and it's moving me away from the microphone, but I'm keeping the microphone in my hand. And Rumsfeld looks down, and he's got a big decision to make. Here's CNN. Here's C-SPAN, here's many other outlets. It's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. What's gonna appear on evening television if he lets some black-hatted goon carry me out for asking a question that he didn't want to answer? So he makes a snap decision. Big decision maker, Rumsfeld. He says, no, let them stay a second. Sotto voce, I'm a Princeton debater. I'm going to destroy this wimp, okay? Well, we went on for 9 minutes, and if you can get it from the web, just click on Rumsfeld, McGovern, Iraq, and it'll come right up. But that was a very, very painful thing for me, not only because the people there were so much rooting for Rumsfeld, you know? I thought I was going to be removed, and I said, so why did you lie? Why did you lie to start this war with so many casualties? Unnecessary war. And I waited for somebody to come. Nobody came, so I asked some follow-up questions. I caught him on two things, the two reasons that he had used for the war. Weapons of mass destruction, which, as you know, were never there, and ties between Iraq and Al-Qaeda, and we'll talk about that in a second. Let me tell you about the weapons of mass destruction. I know from my service of 27 years in the CIA as an analyst what kind of capabilities we had from our overhead, we call it national technical means, but what it is satellites, imaging, not only with photography, but infrared and radar and everything you can imagine. And we were blanketing, you know, that part of the world. Now, the fellow in charge of the National Intelligence and Mapping place, the imagery analysis, in other words, that was a fellow named James Clapper, 3-star general at the time. And he saw to it that when these emigres came to the Pentagon and said, oh, there's a big chemical factory there at these coordinates, and his analysts found out that that was a chicken farm, James Clapper made sure that that never got reported up to anybody, okay? Now, anybody know what position James Clapper has now under Obama? Pardon? Director. Yeah, he's the imperial wizard of the intelligence community. He's the director of national intelligence. Now, did he do anything untoward more recently? Well, he was the guy that 2 years ago was asked by the senator from Washington, Ron Wyden, does NSA monitor the conversations of millions of Americans? No, not wittingly. Bald-faced lie, under oath, okay? Now, you would think he would have been cashiered, or maybe given a job in the filing booth or something, but no, he's the premier director of national intelligence. What does that tell you about our president? Does that suggest to you that our president is afraid of the CIA and the associated agencies? I think he is. In any case, Clapper kept his mouth shut, even though there was no photography to prove there were weapons of mass destruction. And there's a fellow who lives not far from here, not far from Albany anyway. His name is Scott Ritter. Anyone heard of Scott Ritter? He was the chief UN inspector, okay, for Iraq, okay? And he was that during the time in 1991, after the Gulf War. They came in and they swept through that country and determined and verified that all those weapons had been destroyed, okay? Now, in 1995, so 4 years later, 2 of Saddam Hussein's sons-in-law defected. They came into Jordan, and they were immediately debriefed by CIA, by the British, by the UN, and the debriefers said, okay, now, his name was Kamel, Hussein Kamel. Hussein, tell us about the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And he said, I'm sorry? Tell us about there aren't any. Oh, what do you mean there aren't any? Well, I thought you knew that they were all destroyed before the UN inspectors could even come in after the first Gulf War in 1991. Are you sure? He said, well, perhaps you haven't done your homework, but I was in charge. I was in charge of the nuclear, biological, chemical, and rocket program in Iraq, and I ordered them destroyed before the UN inspectors could find them all. You did? Well, how do you know they were destroyed? Well, Hussein Kamel was getting a little impatient. And he said, well, I don't know how it works in your country, but when I'm in charge of a program and I order these things destroyed, they get destroyed. Yeah, but how do you know? Did you inspect? Oh, yeah, I spot checked these places. Yeah, what are you trying to get me to say that there's still weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? There aren't any. He was totally mystified by this attitude. 1995, the UN prepared a detailed debriefing report on what Hussein Kamel said. Now, as the war fever got stoked up by the Bush administration in 2002 and the beginning of 2003, remember the attack on Iraq in March of 2003, what happened was someone thought that this was crazy, and they thought, well, maybe if we got a hold of that UN report and leaked it to Newsweek, maybe we could stop this war. And so that someone did do that. And Newsweek, and this is the end of January 2003, Newsweek looked at that and said, whoa, really, yuck, whoa, that's not what we've been saying. But to their credit, they put it in their Periscope part, that little part in the front of Newsweek, little report, which appeared in the printed version on the 3rd of March. So 19 March is when we attacked, -3, I think that's 2 weeks plus before the attack. Now, the mainstream media had been rooting all along for an attack. And so they were quite nonplussed and they didn't know what to do. And so how do you do that if you're a mainstream stenographer? I mean, well, yeah, that's what they were, stenographers rather than journalists. What do you do? Well, you check it out. So what did they do? They went to the CIA, public affairs people, and they said, what is this about a debriefing report saying there are no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq? And the PR fellow said, well, that is absurd. It's wrong, it's unfounded, and it's false. All the words that he could think of that say the same thing. And what did our journalists do? Anybody know? They said, oh, wow, thanks for telling us, because we were going to write a story about that. That would be quite a story, because that's what we've been saying. Wow, that's how bad it was, folks. Now, who was that person? I can tell you now, that person was Scott Ritter. He felt strongly enough, given all his work in verifying Iraqi compliance with the destruction of weapons of mass destruction, that he leaked the UN report to Newsweek. Now, the UN report has no classification system, so in a way he wasn't leaking classified information, but that's what he did, and that's what they didn't do. That's how corrupt the system was. So the other thing I'll say about this is that Scott, who lives, as I say, not far from here, I tried to see his senator. His senator was a woman, Hillary Clinton, I think was her name, yeah. And he did everything he could to see her and to tell her, look, Senator Clinton, there aren't any weapons of mass. I can tell you that. You know, I can show you the drawings. I can show you the debriefing. Please, you know. And guess what she said? Don't let him in. Don't let him in. Scott Ritter couldn't get past the front door of Hillary Clinton's office in New York or in Washington. She didn't want to hear it. So if you hear Hillary Clinton or George Bush or anybody else say this was a terrible mistake, it wasn't a mistake. It was fraud on the part of Bush, and it was the most despicable kind of political maneuvering on the part of Hillary Clinton, because she wanted to become president someday, and she thought if she didn't show how tough she was here, then, you know, she might not get the nomination. Now she's got the nomination, and we'll have to see what happens. That was the story on the weapons of mass destruction. Now, on the links between Saddam Hussein and Al-Qaeda, that was of equal interest. Why? Because the Bush and Cheney regime wanted very much to associate Saddam Hussein with, what are we discussing tonight? 9/11, okay? And before the attack on Iraq, 69% of the American people believed that Saddam Hussein played some kind of role in 9/11. It was a masterful propaganda coup. Now, did the intelligence community support that? No way did we. And that's why I asked Rumsfeld on the 6th of May, 10 years ago, why did you say the evidence was bulletproof that Saddam Hussein had these ties, operational ties with Al-Qaeda, when other people were saying there was no evidence? All my colleagues were saying there was no evidence. Well, that was the reason he said that, because he wanted to use this again to justify the war. Well, after I got finished challenging Rumsfeld that great day on 6 May, you don't get that chance very often. It was really quite something. I'm walking out of the auditorium, and usually this is at that think tank that I described before, this wealthy, white, southern, well-heeled, defense-friendly think tank. And usually when you do something like this, you know, somebody will come up and they'll look, make sure their friends aren't looking, and they'll go, yeah, way to go, way to go. Yeah, like that. None of that, okay? So it was a fire trap. I'm caught up in the middle aisle, so I think I'll turn around. And I look down, and everybody turns their head down like this. And all of a sudden, my cell phone rings, okay? And I get a call. Mr. McGovern? Yeah? This is Anderson Cooper calling. Oh, Anderson, how are you? Well, fine, yeah. You're causing quite a stir down here in Atlanta. I'd like to have you on my program tonight. I said, sure, yeah. He said, but first, I need to ask you a question. So what would that be? He said, well, weren't you, I mean, how do I say, I mean, well, weren't you afraid? Now, I was in shock, you know, and I was just thinking my truth. That's a normal question. I said, no, I wasn't afraid. I've briefed defense secretaries before. I always told them the truth, and this, I was sorry I had to call this guy a liar in effect, but then I thought, wait a second, wait, time out here, McGovern. Who is this guy? This is Anderson Cooper, heir to the Vanderbilt fortune. Pretty face on CNN, riding high, and he's asking me, was I afraid? And so I said, this is my only chance with Anderson Cooper. I said, well, Anderson, actually, let me be real candid with you. It was a real high. It was really high. What I had done was done my homework. I knew what questions I wanted to ask him, and I knew he'd have to lie or else reverse what he said. So, you know, Anderson, you might want to think of trying that sometime. Do your homework, ask him real questions, and you'll find it's a real high. It's a real high, you know. Well, that's very well and good, Mr. McGovern. I'll have my people get in touch with your people. I said, no, Anderson, don't try that. I don't have any people. Just call this number back, okay? So there you had it, huh? Self-censorship, fear, well-founded fear, because you have to cater to all these lies, or else you lose your job. And the jobs are, you know, I mean, not that Anderson needs it. He's not going to be out on the streets of Atlanta with a cup. I mean, but other people feel, you know, that's what they need. That's why you get these, well, I don't know, try to keep this clean. These guys, these correspondents that ask questions of our candidates and all that kind of stuff. So what else should I say here about 9/11? Well, nobody asked the question as to why. Why would these hijackers and the people who planned all of this for them, why would they do such a thing? And once we figure out that, well, maybe we can figure out how to defeat terrorism, okay? Now, if you ask people why these things were hijacked, I dare say most people right here tonight would say, well, you know, maybe they would say, because they hate us, or they hate our freedom, or they hate our, well, hello, I don't know if they hate, I mean, everybody I think would like to be free, so why is it? Why do they hate us if that's what they hate? Now, I have a simple solution as to how to defeat terrorism. It's the same way that you defeat malaria. Yeah, it's that simple. With malaria, you find the mosquitoes, right? And you trace them back to where they breed in the swamp, okay? And you get that swamp, and then you line up 3 platoons of sharpshooters, and you try to get each one of those mosquitoes as they leave the swamp, right? Not right. What do? Anybody? You drain the swamp. Now there's a swamp of grievances that the people who hate us, legitimate grievances that won't quit, the way we've propped up their dictators that oppress them, the way our policy is so joined with Israelis' policy that there's no, as they like to say in Washington, there's no space or air between our two policies. My knuckles don't go together anymore, but there's no air between our... Now, how do the people who are oppressed, the Palestinians, for example, whose territories have been occupied since 1967, how do they feel about America giving the kind of support to Israel without which they could not do this anymore? If you look at the 9/11 Commission report, and the first thing I did was to look for what they might have gotten from Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Anybody remember who he was? The sort of the brains behind the attack. You know, he sort of planned it. And so he was one of the guys that they captured. And when the 9/11 Commission people were drafting their report, they found out, same way I did, reading the New York Times, hey, they got Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. They call him KSM, okay, KSM, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Well, I know these young people, two of them at least, that worked on this commission. I know what we'll do. Let's ask them why he did it. Part of our portfolio here is to ask them why they did it. So let's ask them. George Tenet, the head of the CIA, says, no way are we going to give you access to Khalid Sheikh Mohammed or any of the other major terrorists that we've captured. Lee Hamilton and Tom Keene, the heads of the 9/11 Commission, say in their book, it was just really clear that Tenet was really going to just insist on that, and so Lee Hamilton knows Tenet for 25 years. He's not going to back off on that. You know, like the 9/11 Commission couldn't subpoena that or get to. Well, anyhow, long story short, they sent questions to the CIA. Please ask, in a word, please ask the brainstorm here, the brains behind the strike, why he did it. Anybody know what he said? Well, suffice it to say that it wasn't given much prominence in the New York Times or the Washington Street Journal or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal. What he said was this, and you can look at the report, it's page 147. Now, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed had studied at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro. He has an engineering degree from Greensboro, from North Carolina, mechanical engineering. And so these young people working on the 9/11 Commission report think, aha, that must be it. Somebody must have cursed at him, somebody called him a towel head, or somebody demeaned him, or maybe he had an affair of the heart that went sour. That's why he hated us, that's why he attacked us, right? Well, that turned out not to be the case. What Khalid Sheikh Mohammed says, and what is recorded on page 147 of the book, of the study, the 9/11 Commission report, is this. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's animus toward the United States sprang not from any experience he had while as a student in this country, but rather from his intense hatred for U.S. policy singularly favoring the state of Israel, period, end quote. Am I suggesting that that was the only reason? No, I'm not. I'm suggesting that was a major reason, and I'm suggesting that's not a reason you're going to see in any media in this country. And there are lots of reasons for that. We can explore those later. So, what about the 9/11 Commission report? Let me finish up talking about that just a little. It's a cover-up. Pure and simple. It's a cover-up. I could tell as soon as I read it. The question is, what's being covered up? Okay? Now, you don't have to believe me about the cover-up. 2 years after their report, the 9/11 Commission report, Lee Hamilton, the Democrat that they trot out for such occasions, and Governor Tom Keene of New Jersey wrote a book. And in the book they said, quote, "We were set up to fail. We were not given enough money. We were not given enough time. We were not given enough access to sensitive information. We were set up to fail, period," end quote. Now, isn't that nice that they tell us 2 years after they issued this very fancy, very well edited report claiming that they had investigated 9/11? It's a sham. And what's needed, of course, is an independent investigation. And my friends in New York City, in that area, And my cousins in New Jersey, my wife lost a cousin at the top of one of the towers, feel really strongly that we're due, and of course the widows and the families of 9/11 people are due an honest, thorough investigation, no holes barred. And we have to force that to happen, because it's not going to happen unless we force it to happen. Now, people say to me, now Ray, what do you think about these conspiracy theorists? And I say, I think they're terrific. And I resent you calling them conspiracy theorists. All they're trying to do is find out what Kane and Hamilton didn't find out. They're looking for the truth, and this is important, because after 9/11, everything changed. So I feel really strongly against people who criticize people who are trying to figure out what happened. People also say to me, now Ray, for God's sake, you know Cheney, you've written extensively about him as you watched him do the kinds of things he did. Don't you believe that he's capable of orchestrating something like 9/11? And I say, sure, I believe that. Well, they said, well then, I said, but you know, I don't do faith-based intelligence. It doesn't matter what I believe. It's what I see in terms of the empirical evidence. Now, the cover-up. Again, what's being covered up? Well, if you reduce it to its simplest terms, it's either gross misfeasance or gross malfeasance. Let's take misfeasance first. Colleen Rowley, the FBI lawyer who was very active in pursuing what happened at 9/11 and criticizing the FBI for whom she worked, she says, Ray, remember, you worked in government, you know as well as I do that people outside government have no idea of the immense capacity for the various agencies to screw up royally all at the same time, to miss big things, to really screw up. So when you're looking at this, don't dismiss that possibility, because it's certainly as likely as not. We know there was no sharing between the CIA and the FBI. We know all kinds of things that didn't happen, okay? We don't we know some of whys, but so that's one possibility. That's the misfeasance, okay? That's the stupidity, that's gross negligence that could be called criminal negligence in my book. The other possibility is something much more sinister. That would be malfeasance. That would be people that actively let it happen or actually plan to let it happen. That's another possibility, and that's what my friends in New York and elsewhere are looking into. We don't have any answers to that. And what we've been looking for mostly is, hey, it's been 15 years, right? 15 years. Usually, within 15 years, somebody gets drunk at some bar and says, you know, oh, hey, Lisa, I'll tell you, let me tell you how we wired those buildings, and I'll tell you how those things went. That hasn't happened, okay? Or you have somebody who was involved and has a qualm of conscience and says, you know, before I die, I think I have to make a clean breath of this and just say, you know, what really happened. That hasn't happened yet. That's far from solid proof of anything, but you would look for that to happen. So where am I? I'm at a point where I say, look, we have more information on the Saudi angle now. We might be able to force more information out, the stuff that's been redacted. We have to keep plugging, and my friends in New York are keeping plugging. So what do? Well, we do the things that Donna has so articulately expressed, and that is, we don't return violence for violence. Those of us who know the expression, an eye for an eye, know that you pursue that and the whole world goes blind, okay? I was very active with The World Can't Wait, and also Not in My Name in the first months after 9/11. But we also have to kind of, we have to do this before our country goes even farther down the slippery scale. There is, Dr. King once said, there is such a thing as too late. Let me share a story out of my experience in Germany about too late. Some of you know Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who is the Lutheran pastor who stood up to the Nazis. They caught up with him and they captured him, and he was put in a Berlin prison, and they hanged him just as the Allies were coming up to free the concentration camps and so forth. There was another fellow who taught at the University of Berlin. His name was Haushofer. Has anyone heard of Haushofer? No, okay. Well, his name was Albrecht Haushofer, and he was a geolog, he was a geology professor, and he got tenure, and some of you know what tenure means, right? Okay. And he got tenure because he kept his mouth shut, because he didn't speak out like so many in church and state, everywhere else. But he had a conscience, and so he started feeling really, really conscience-stricken when his Jewish friends and Gypsy friends and other people were being carted off to concentration camps. So he spoke out against Hitler, and he acquired quite an amazing following at the university, so they wrapped him up and threw him in a different prison in Berlin, just as the Allies were approaching. Now, they either hanged you or they shot you. The Gestapo did, if you were convicted of such crimes as, you know, the kind of thing that Haushofer and Bonhoeffer were doing. So in this particular prison, they shot you. But before they shoot you or hang you, you had to sign a confession, of course. I mean, the Germans are very orderly. If they don't have a confession from you, then it's not quite tidy enough, okay? So they said, okay, here, Albrecht, sign this. We're gonna shoot you tomorrow, so sign this tonight. And he said, forget about it, I'm not gonna sign any confession. Well, they got so angry that they shot him anyway. But as they picked him up from the floor, out from his pocket came this zettel, little piece of paper, and on it was written his confession in the form of a sonnet. It's short. I'd like to read it to you, and then I'll translate it as we go along. But it's very moving because it speaks to the issue of there is such a thing as too late. Schuld. Anybody here have German? Okay, well, you can check mine. Yeah, okay, Schuld is guilt. Okay, so this is his sonnet confession, Schuld. Okay. Doch, bin ich schuldig, aber anders als ihr denkt. Yeah, I'm guilty, but it's not what you're thinking. Ich musste früher meine Pflicht erkennen. Ich musste schärfer Unheil nennen. I should have spoken out much earlier. I should have more sharply called evil, evil. Mein Urteil habe ich zu lang gelenkt. I put off my judgment far too long. Ich habe gewarnt, I did warn, and he did warn. And, you know, he had his following there. Ich habe gewarnt, aber nicht genug. What's genug? Enough, right. Ich habe gewarnt, aber nicht genug und klar. What's klar? Claro, klar, clear, klur. There's no comparative in German. Klar is klar, right? Ich habe gewarnt, I did warn, aber nicht genug und klar. Und heute weiß ich, was ich schuldig war. And today I know what I was guilty of. Whoa. So is he confessing to dissonance or opposing the Nazis? Well, he's confessing to not having spoken out early enough, sharply enough, claro, clearly enough. So what am I saying here? I'm saying that it's up to us citizens here to keep up with what's going on and then to find our voice. What happened in Germany in the 30s when people couldn't find their voice, the religions, the churches, the Lutheran Church and the Catholic Church could not find their voice. The people like Bonhoeffer were the exception. So, if our institutions even our religious institutions, which have some claim, or used to have some claim to moral authority, if they won't speak out, who's got to speak out? Who's got to divulge what's going on here? One of my favorite theologians is Annie Dillard. And she says, you know, who shall ascend to the altar of God? Who shall stand in God's holy place? There is only us. There never has been any other. So folks, there is only us. There never has been any other. And let's choose this 15th anniversary to make a new commitment to find out what's going on. Now, this is probably the most important thing I'll say tonight. I've been around 53 years in Washington since I left my native Bronx. So I've seen a lot of change. But there's one change that dwarfs all the other changes in significance, and that is that we no longer have a free media. That is big. In my day, when I was most of your age, I could read the New York Times and find out what was going on. Now I read the New York Times and I find out what's missing. I find out what they're skewing or what they're completely avoiding, okay? So the Fourth Estate is dead. Fourth Estate. Yeah, that comes from the English politician Edmund Burke. It's worth recounting why Fourth Estate. See, in those days there were 3 estates in Parliament. There were 2 Commons and 1 Lords, okay? So he gets up, he's a member of Parliament, and he says, now, I'm delighted to be a member of one of these 3 estates here, but there's a 4th estate, and that estate is much more important than all of us put together. And that is the 4th estate, and those are the gentlemen up there in the balcony, gentlemen of the press, who keep us honest. They are far more important than all of us in Parliament. Whoa, that's the 4th estate. Was he right? Jefferson said the same thing a little bit later. He said, somebody said, well, if you had a choice just between a government and a free press, which would you choose? He says, that's a no-brainer, a free press every time. Otherwise, you get a dictatorial government. So we've got to keep that in mind and make sure that we know where to get information. Now, my favorite place for information, and I have to confess that I learned just as much about American history, current and past, as I did in all my years at Fordham University. That's Amy Goodman on Democracy Now! How many people watch Amy Goodman? Okay. Now, some of the younger folks haven't heard of Amy Goodman, but if you just go to democracynow.org, you'll find her. Now, in retirement, you know, I'm entitled to sleep in, right? My wife says, when are you going to retire? But my pastor says, retirement is a secular concept. Anyhow, I get up at 17 minutes before 8 every morning, Monday through Friday. Why? Well, because it takes 15 minutes for an Irishman to brew a decent cup of coffee. And I'm talking instant coffee here, you know. And then 2 minutes to drink enough so that I'm awake enough to watch Amy Goodman. Now, I learned later, after about 2 years, McGovern, you don't have to get up that early. You can watch Amy Goodman at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. If you wait till 12 o'clock, you can just read it. It's much faster, right? You know? But I do that. Number one, it gets me up. Number two, it usually informs me before anybody else what's going on. And when I get a call from RT or Al Jazeera, CNN won't touch me anymore, then I know, you know, so, oh yeah, sure, I know about that. Yeah, sure, I'd be happy to come in and do a little interview. So what I'm saying is here, democracynow.org, you can look at it late at night. You can look at it anytime, and you can read it or you can watch it. How many people know about the insurrection in North Dakota, where Native Americans have been bitten by dogs in the manner of Bull Connor? Well, Amy Goodman was there. She was there last Friday. She was there last Saturday. She's there today, I think. It has to do with an oil pipeline they want to put under their sacred ground and under their river, and the danger that they'll lose their clean water. So there's that. Now, how many of you folks know what today is? It's an anniversary, and I'll give you a hint. It's the 45th anniversary. Yeah? Right. Could you say that louder?
The Attica prison uprising.
Right. Where's Attica? Not far from here, right? Okay. And what happened that day?
Massacre.
Massacre of whom? Prisoners, mostly, and some of the guards, right. And why? Because they sent the troops in. Because they sent the National Guard in. Were there legitimate grievances? Was there a swamp of grievances there on the part of the inmates? There sure as hell were. And how do we choose to deal with that? Send in the sharpshooters. So the reason I know that is because Amy Goodman had it on our program this morning. Everyone who lives around here should know what happened in Attica, particularly since our prison complex is so great and such a blight on our civilization. Dostoevsky, my favorite novelist, said, if you want to measure the level of civilization in a country, go visit the prisons. Last thing I'll do here, and I promise this is the very last thing. We Irish people like to talk forever. I have a poem here that I copied off the wall of a Catholic worker down in the Bowery. She was letting me use her room since she was in Iraq or Syria, I forget which one, attending to people that she had befriended 10 years ago. The author of the poem is a fellow named Daniel Berrigan, who died just several months ago, and who was a prophet, who was a real leader in my view. And he didn't publish this poem, he just gave it to some special people, like the person whose room I was using. And so I said, wow, I think I'm gonna copy this poem and memorize it and kind of use it. And I haven't memorized it yet, but I would like to read it to you because it speaks to what many of us are involved in or want to be involved in, and it gives me courage. Now let's see, maybe I'll get my glasses here. The title of this poem is Some, S-O-M-E. Some stood up once and sat down. Some walked a mile and walked away. Some stood up twice, then sat down. I've had it, they said. Some walked 2 miles, then walked away. It's too much, they cried. Some stood and stood and stood. They were taken for fools. They were taken for having been taken in. Some walked and walked and walked. They walked the earth, they walked the waters, they walked the air. Why do you stand, they were asked, and why do you walk? Because of the children, they said, and because of the heart, and because of the bread, because the cause is the heart's beat and the children born and the risen bread. I recommend that all of us take to heart this anniversary and kind of pledge to ourselves that we'll become some of these some, and do what we can to bring justice back to our land so that we can be proud again being Americans. Thank you very much for listening. I understand there'll be questions. Welcome.
My name's Bill Donahue. I'm a member of Veterans for Peace. One of the things that you didn't happen to mention, I'm wondering how much influence it might have had on the going into the war in '03, the name of Halliburton.
Well, Halliburton's where Cheney used to work, and the stock went up in Halliburton real high and real fast as soon as they got all the contracts to provide things that we Army people used to provide ourselves in Iraq, Afghanistan, and now where else, you know. So yeah, there was, you know, what the Pope talks about, I don't often quote the Pope, but when he got up before Congress in September of last year, what he said was, you know, the real problem is the blood-soaked arms traders. Whoa, doesn't sound like a Pope, does it? The blood-soaked arms traders, okay? So what he's talking about is what Eisenhower warned us about, the military-industrial congressional complex. Now, many of you don't know that Eisenhower intended to add congressional. It was going to be not only the military-industrial complex, it was going to be the military-industrial congressional complex, because he was there. He saw how it worked, okay? Now, when the Pope said, the real problem is the blood-drenched arms traders, all the senators, oh yeah, right. Whoa, whoa. And then they felt, just to make sure that the last couple of thousand that was given to them by Lockheed or Boeing was still there in their back pocket. Because that's how it works, folks. That's how it works. Good news is that today, Congress faced into this and voted to deny sending $1 billion, I think, $1.5 billion of arms sales to Saudi Arabia because of the carnage they're causing in Yemen. The president's going to veto that. What kind of president is that? What kind of president is going to veto? Well, a president who's affected by blood-drenched arms traders. That's who. And there's no underestimating the power. I'll just say one more thing. Our government, or our arms traders, have offered military sales to Saudi Arabia worth, how much money would you say? Pardon? Hundreds of billions. Wow, somebody knows, right? Actually, it's 114 billion. That's a B, folks. And that's a figure that goes back just to the first day of the Obama administration. $114 billion. Now, what could we do with that money here in upstate New York or downstate New York, okay? Now, what am I saying? I'm saying that colors our treatment of Saudi Arabia, and we give them a pass on what they do. It doesn't matter if they're bombing the Yemenis to hell, as long as they'll keep purchasing the Hellfire missiles from us to bomb them with. It's an incredibly terrible situation in terms of what runs the arms merchants that run so much of our policy. And lastly, people say, Ray, for God's sake, don't exaggerate. You say 114 billion, but that's just what we've offered the Saudis. Only 50 billion has been approved. And I'm thinking, yeah, I don't know if you would know, Donna, is only an adjective or an adverb in that case. I don't, whether it's an adjective, it doesn't belong before 50 billion, does it? Only 50 billion. Give me a break. So money speaks, and that's a large reason for the policies that you find our government following.
Hi, my name's Chris Rounds. I appreciate the knowledge and background that you bring to this, but I'm concerned about the message you're sending, especially to the students in the room. And that to me is a message of cynicism about American politics, and a pretty clear message that Hillary Clinton can't be trusted, a liar, as Mr. Trump would have it. That to me is more likely to lead to more of what you're complaining about, rather than a more active engagement with democracy. And I would just add, Democracy Now! Is a great program, but anybody who thinks that you can get all your news from one outlet is not a well-informed critical thinker. We all have to look at a lot of different sources. We have to make up our own minds. We have to be well-informed. And we have to vote as if democracy matters in this country. And you're not encouraging that.
I'm not what?
You're not encouraging us to vote as if democracy matters. What you're saying, and you just said it, all of these politicians are corrupt. All they care about is the money in their pockets. Do you honestly believe that there's no difference between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump?
See, these are the kinds of conversations that I find deflating.
Yeah, these are difficult comments and difficult to, I didn't say all politicians. There are 2 or 3 that are not corrupt, okay? And I didn't say you only should watch Amy Goodman. If I said, I don't remember saying Hillary Clinton lies, but I should have, because she lies through her teeth. Hillary Clinton is the candidate of the Democratic Party only because she stole the nomination from a fellow named Bernie Sanders. And the proof of that is in these emails. And the reason that they're blaming the Russians for the emails is because they don't want anybody to read the emails, because these emails show beyond any shadow of a doubt that the DNC and Hillary Clinton stole the nomination from Bernie Sanders. So, yeah, I'm willing to speak truth to power or anyone, but that's the way I feel now. If you dispute that, I'd like you to show me, or I'd show you what the emails say. But it was a masterful diversion.
Did the people vote in those elections?
I'm sorry?
Did the people vote in those primaries?
Oh, I'm not
Do
talking
their
about
votes
primaries.
count?
I'm
Or
talking about primaries. No,
were they
I'm
just
talking-
tricked?
No. Okay, I think we're sort of going around here, not going to get very far. You want to go?
Yeah, I think I'm sympathetic to what you're saying, because I have concerns about the predicament we're in right now. I won't, and I've made this commitment to myself, to shut up about this election. But I will say that the predicament we are in right now, facing the specter of Donald Trump, comes from the belief that we only have 2 choices, and that we will, sort of kowtow to party power and party politics and say, okay, well, that's the one we get. And is it better than that one? It's always better than that one. I watched cartoons when I was a kid. I really did like Augie Doggie and Doggy Daddy. I can't remember who the villain was in that one, but it is oftentimes lately, to me, the same kind of setup. When I saw the kids across this nation come out for Bernie Sanders, like, let's face it, an old Jewish guy. Like, are you kidding me? They were listening to a message. They were listening to an honest human being. Now, I don't think that in his participation in government, Bernie Sanders is always 100% honest. I think that they are gravitating towards something that feels more right, is really hopeful to me. Well, right now, here's my take on Hillary Clinton personally. As a human being, I don't know what's in her heart. And I think that is part of her rhetorical stance, and that's part of her problem. As a leader, I think she made somehow a brilliant and very powerful move to scare the crap out of me, because the last thing I want is, Ivanka's papa in the White House. On the other hand, I'm not sure what a Clinton presidency buys us, except 8 more years of a pretense that we have voted correctly. So I will grant you this. If Hillary Clinton is elected, I think it becomes so much more essential that every one of us lets her know what we will and won't tolerate. And I think that's true no matter who is elected. But I also believe right now that if Trump is elected, we may not have the power to do anything. And that's because, I mean, I know Dick Cheney, Dick Cheney, Dick Cheney. I'm scared to death of Karl Rove. This guy did not go away. So I sympathize. I'm not, I think there is a cynicism that is sweeping through this nation. I don't think many of us know what we're going to be doing next year. I don't know what the future brings. But the fact that Hillary Clinton sort of managed to find a bigger demon, you know what? She won. I mean, from my point of view, I got to give it to you.
First rate, thanks for your military service. Thanks for your civilian service. Address the Rumsfeld sale of the centrifugal tubes in 1983 to the Hussein regime when they were at war with Iran. I think maybe this is where it started the weapons of mass destruction that they had, or at least a thought. And also, just off point, why do you think Bobby and Jack were eradicated by the owners of this country? Why Bobby and Jack were eradicated by the owners of this country? Just your opinion. And last but not least, my view is same money pays for both parties, so to me there's no difference.
On the stuff you're talking about, 83, I don't know. You know, I know we were supplying, and the West Europeans were supplying precursor chemicals to Saddam Hussein, and he was using them. And we knew that. So our indignation about the use of chemical weapons is directly attributed to the reason is sort of a little bit, giving hypocrisy a bad name, since we provided the chemicals and we knew that he was using them. Let me ask you a question. Did the Iranians use chemical weapons in that 9-year war from 81 to 89?
Yes, they did.
Okay, you don't think so?
With Iraq?
Yeah. Iran? Yeah. Well, no, they didn't. They could have. But the Ayatollah was against using chemical weapons or any weapons of mass destruction. And even though Iraq was decimating their troops, the Iranians did not use those weapons. So, you know, chemical weapons, you're right. I was on active duty then. And we knew the Iraqis were using them, and we knew the Iranians were not. So, now the last question was, money plays a big role in both parties. We know that, especially with the nominees we have. So, but it's not only money. I have a lot of faith in our country. I think it's us. We got to feel not powerful. We got to feel powerful, and we got to feel. I think some cynicism is really good. I think apathy is really bad. I was on a campus not too long ago. I was sitting with the head of the student council, and I said, I hear there's a lot of apathy on this campus. And what do you think? And he says, well, I don't know, and I don't care. I'm sorry, that's apocryphal, okay? But there is a lot of apathy, and the last thing I want to do is make people so cynical that they won't get out. But they have to know what's going on. And there were folks here that didn't know about Amy Goodman. I think she's really worth listening to. And if you think you're getting the news from the New York Times, I have to tell you that the New York Times is only giving you a very little bit of the news, and only with a slant that Russia, Putin, very bad. Putin sometime have no shirt on. Putin ride horse with no shirt on. Putin very, very bad. Putin invade, this all that kind of stuff. So it's really important that you know where to look for your sources. And I'm not telling you exactly where to look, but you get familiar with what the good websites are, and that enables you not to feel powerless and to get together and do something together in community. Sorry to take so long. Oh, about the Kennedys, yeah. Well, there's a great book out. It's JFK and the Unspeakable, and it's by James Douglas. His name is Douglas with 2 S's on the end, okay? Now, does he have an axe to grind? I don't think so. He runs a Catholic worker house for impoverished people in Birmingham, Alabama, okay? You know, it's a stretch to think he's got some animus or some sort of special angle. But he's looked at this, he's worked at it for 15 years, and he put out a book 6 years ago called JFK and the Unspeakable. It's the best. It draws not only on earlier books and earlier studies, but also on the material that has been released by act of Congress now, having to do with the Kennedy assassination. And I think he's got it right, and what he says is that the CIA, in the person of Allen Dulles, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who didn't want, you know, who thought that Kennedy was soft on communism, and elements even of the FBI and the Secret Service got together and said, this man is too soft on communism, it's not the kind of guy we want, and so they got rid of him. That's my take on that, and I think this book might persuade you of the same thing. It's worse than that, because I think Obama is also afraid of these same people. And I have an anecdotal evidence to that effect. A friend of mine told me that a source of his was at a little dinner for big contributors to Barack Obama's campaign, okay? And they have a nice dinner, but the people started ping on them and say, look, you know, you're supposed to be a progressive. Why did you do this? Or why did you do that? And finally, Obama got kind of exercised. He got up before dessert and he said, look, hey, you guys seem oblivious. Don't you remember what happened to Dr. King? Now, my take on that is that if he was going to have that kind of attitude, he really never should have tried to be president, you know? I mean, take risks. You do the job. But you don't shrink from holding torturers accountable, holding people who designed and conducted wars of aggression accountable. See, that's the big problem. Obama didn't do that from the outset. All it was rhetoric. And that doesn't do it, because the justice system needs action as well as rhetoric.
I would like you to comment more on the decline of the Fourth Estate. I'd like you to talk about why it's happened. Is it caused by corporate ownership of people, places like the New York Times, or is it caused by the growth of so many different internet sources, or is it government suppression, subpoenaing reporters and things like that? And also, to follow that up, what can we do about it? Is there anything we can get a better press like we used to have? 6 corporations own about 90% of our media. Mega, multinational corporations, okay? Now, most of them profiteer, I don't say profit, but profiteer on blood-stained arms sales, okay? We're talking Boeing, we're talking Lockheed, we're talking BAA, we're talking a lot of these manufacturers. So if you're, let's say, you're ABC or Disney or something like that, and a portion of your business area is maybe 10% is the news thing, and you make a lot of money out of tension, let's face it, war is really good for business, peace not so much. Well, what are you going to do with respect to your commentators? We know that before Iraq, like 93% of the commentators on Fox were all pushing for the war. They didn't let anybody like me on, or hardly anybody. And so, you know, if your media is controlled to that extent, you'd be surprised if it was more fair and balanced. It isn't. Now, the New York Times was the prime abuser of the press before the war on Iraq. What used to happen is people like Condoleezza Rice, the national security advisor to George Bush, would call the Times in on a Friday and say, hey, there are aluminum tubes now. They can only be used for gaseous diffusion purposes to make nuclear material for a nuclear bomb, and we found them. They were ordered by Iraq, and they're on their way to Iraq. You know, this is really bad. Oh, well, give me some more details. Well, what happens? Sunday morning, the Sunday Times has this new report. Aluminum tubes going to Iraq
and they can only be used for nuclear material making, okay? On the Sunday talk shows, Condoleezza Rice is asked about this. Have you seen the New York Times report this morning about these aluminum tubes? And Condoleezza Rice says, yes, we have seen that. And it's a very, very dangerous thing, because the last thing we need is for the first sign of weapons of mass destruction to be a mushroom cloud, okay? That's how corrupt it was. She'd give them the information, they'd take it for a day, they'd publish it on Sunday, she'd talk to the talk show, and we know that for a fact. So why are they doing it now? Why are they bashing Russia? Well, you know, it's hard for me to understand, but one of the main things they accuse Russia, of course, is invading Ukraine. So let me just ask, did Russia invade Ukraine? No, they didn't, okay? Did Russia take Crimea back from Ukraine?
Yeah.
Yeah, they did, okay? Now, did Putin say, hey, you know, I think this just sounds like a good idea to me, I think we'll take Crimea back from Ukraine? Or was there something more? Was there something happened that made him do that, or prompted him to entertain doing that? Anybody know? Any of you know?
Didn't they vote?
What's that? Oh, there was a coup. Oh, was there a coup? Well, who launched the coup? Why was there a coup?
Because of the government.
Yeah, see, the government, the freely elected government of the Ukraine was offered a deal by the European Union and the United States, the IMF, and they wanted to sucker into the kind of loans that Greece took and make them a debtor nation, have free supply of cheap labor and all that kind of stuff. And the Ukrainian guy, Yanukovych, said, well, you know, maybe I'll do that. But then the Russians came and said, this is crazy, looks like this will happen. They offered him a far better deal. And so Yanukovych said, no, I'm going to go with the Russian deal. Well, there was a coup arranged by our country and the Europeans. And it happened on the 22nd of February. And the first thing that the new government immediately, in record time, recognized by the United States, first thing they said was, hey, maybe we ought to join NATO. And then the second thing is, maybe we ought to ban Russian as an official language. So it's very clear what was going on the 22nd. There was a coup. Now, on the 23rd, Putin convened his advisors and said, hey guys, this is serious. These people are talking about joining NATO, a country right on our doorstep. And what are we going to do about our only warm water naval port? The only all-year naval port in Crimea that we've had and operated from since Catherine the Great, you know, around the same time as our revolution. Well, they weren't about to let the Crimea become part of NATO. If anyone in Washington thought that they would let that happen, they were sadly mistaken. So what Putin did was say, hey, let's ask the Crimeans whether they want to rejoin us or stay with Ukraine, with these coup leaders. And the Crimeans decided, in a plebiscite, the figures are 96%. That's hard to believe for a Westerner, but I was there. I was there in June for 2 weeks. I couldn't find anybody who voted against rejoining Russia, so they rejoined Russia. Now, that was a redrawing of borders in Europe. Was that against international accords? It was against the Budapest Memorandum of, 1994, when the Ukraine and Britain and France and the United States decided, well, look, we're not going to redraw borders anymore. But there was another provision in that accord which said no nation or group of nations would exert undue influence on Ukraine, given its very sad, very a debilitating economic situation. So, long story short, for Americans and NATO, history in Ukraine begins on the 23rd of February. They don't like to think about the coup that we arranged. And, you know, this is not some, you don't have to take McGovern's word for the coup. This is called by one prominent analyst the most blatant coup in history. Why? Because it was advertised on YouTube 2.5 weeks before. Now, what do I mean? Well, one of Hillary Clinton's, well, she was her PR person. Her name is Victoria Nuland, Assistant Secretary for European Affairs. She was talking to our ambassador in Kiev, the capital of the Ukraine, and she said, okay, we got it glued now. We got it all set. Yats is the man. He knows about the central bank. He knows about austerity. So let Klitschko and the others wait in the wings. Yats is the guy. Well, I guess it was the Russian, I don't know. Somebody intercepted that telephone conversation. It was unclear. It was, not encrypted. And they put it up on YouTube at the end of January. So 4 weeks before the coup, or 3 weeks. Now, one would have thought, well, maybe I'm old-fashioned, but in the old days, if a coup or coup plans were divulged, and the coup, the new prime minister was named in the plans, a decent respect for the opinions of mankind, so to speak, would have sort of said, well, too bad, Yats, you're not going to be the new prime minister. But no, next day, he's recognized as the prime minister. I couldn't believe it. I wrote an article right away, saying, yikes, it's Yats! it was unbelievable. So that's how it happened, okay? Now, did the Russians invade? There were people in the eastern provinces of Ukraine who wouldn't abide this new government, led in large degree by proto-fascists, okay? And so did the Russians give them the kind of military support and so forth like that? I think almost certainly they did. They talk about volunteers, people on leave from the army. Yeah, sure they did some of that. But did they invade Ukraine? Or did they invade Crimea? No. Crimea was taken in a bloodless operation because the Russians already had over 20,000 troops in Crimea under a bilateral accord with Ukraine. So all they did was dress these troops up without any insignia. They're so-called green men or, polite men. And they went around to the various Ukrainian installations and offices and said, now look, we don't want any trouble, but we're going to take over right now. We know you have no instructions from Kiev, but we have instructions from Moscow. We're taking over. And not one person was killed. There was one shot fired, I think, in error or something. And so to talk about the Russians invading Crimea, they didn't. Talk about the Russians invading Ukraine, they didn't. They helped in the east, but when you run a coup like that, last thing I'll say is this. This all has to do with the enlargement of NATO. When the Soviet Union disappeared, the Warsaw Pact, the group of countries that was formed to counter NATO, and vice versa, there was an agreement that if Germany was allowed to be reunited, that we would not move NATO 1 inch to the east. Now, when Bill Clinton came in, he said, show me where that's written down. It wasn't written down. So, long story short, NATO doubled in size. It became so bad that in 2008, there were rumors that Ukraine and Georgia would become part of NATO, that NATO was going to meet in Bucharest at a summit and arrange to have Ukraine and Georgia join NATO. So what happened? And how do I know this? Well, it's important how I know this. I know this from WikiLeaks cables that were released by Bradley Manning They're relatively low-level classification, but they came from the embassy in Moscow. Now, if I've seen one telegram from the embassy in Moscow, I've seen about 5,000, okay? This is genuine, it's unadulterated, and it says, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who in 2008 was also foreign minister and is today, he met with John Kerry today to talk about Syria. Lavrov called me in, this is Ambassador Bill Burns, and he said, Mr. Burns, do you know what "niet" means? And I said, what do you mean? He said, do you know what "niet" means? He said, yeah, I know. Well, "niet" means "niet," and I'm talking about Ukraine in NATO. We hear rumors going on. Mind you, this is the 1st of February, 2008. We hear rumors going on that you're about to vote to include Ukraine in NATO. Niet. We're not going to allow that, because once that happened, there'd be civil war in Ukraine, and we would have to decide whether we need to intervene or not. So tell your people back in Washington, "niet" means "niet." Now we have the cable. Bill Burns played it straight. The title of the cable is "Niet" means "niet," Russia's red line on Ukrainian membership in NATO. Right there. And he reported it right on the up and up, the 1st of February, 2008. On the 3rd of April 2008, NATO met in Bucharest, and the final declaration said, Ukraine and Georgia will become members of NATO. Okay, well, if anyone thought that the Russians were going to allow the kind of coup in Kiev that would turn Ukraine into a NATO member and lose or forfeit their only all-weather NATO port, all-weather naval port, they were sadly mistaken. So the people running our policy toward the Ukraine either wanted the Russians to react even more strongly, or wanted to be able to say, look at the Russians, they're invading people, Putin is a bad guy, and that's what we're getting now, and that's this. No one hears about the coup, but the coup is what started it all. Everything else was a reaction to the coup.
So like a lot of the information we're clearly not receiving and might be a little bit miscued. So in that scenario, what is an action that a student can take or that someone can take in order to counteract the problems and kind of to introduce reforms with a government that might not be listening or want to listen when the news sources are in the same scenario? What is something that a person can do to counteract these problems?
Mm-hmm. That's a great question, and it really depends so much on local circumstances that I wouldn't pretend to know what in your specific area would be possible. What I do know is a procedure, a way of attacking this kind of thing, or a way of dealing with it. And this is going to sound sort of trite, but it's tried and true, and it works. I know it works because I've been doing it for 20 years. Get a small group of people whom you trust, who think about the world in the same way you do, not exactly the same, but pretty much, and meet with them once a week without fail. A priority. Wednesday lunch, once a week. Okay, now you will be amazed at what synergy, or what comes out of this little community where thoughts will arise that you never would have thought all by yourself, And once you get some ideas as to what to do, then there are two things that are really important. One is support, You know that the next Wednesday, if you say, well, I'm going to see my congressman on Monday, that next Wednesday, your friends are going to say, well, how'd that go, And it's going to make it much more likely that you follow through on your promise. And then you have the support of your folks, whether you do something together or, as in my experience, you're involved in different kinds of outreach ministries, okay? You have that mutual support. Now, again, that sounds so basic and so small, but it's critical to have a community around yourself and not go off like I was inclined to do 20 years ago all by myself, change the world. You got to have people that will rein you in when you need to be reined in, support you when you need support. And you'll find that out of that kind of small community, you'll be able to figure out what to do and how to do it. And I dare say right here in this community, you could probably speak of 3 or 4 friends all right away to do that. Now, there's only one requirement in my view, and that has to be at least one woman in each one of those groups. Because the women are the ones that have all the guts. And I've learned that not only from Medea Benjamin or Cindy Sheehan or Ann Wright. You know, last thing, I'm sitting there next to the microphone and Rumsfeld is saying all these lies, right? So I'm preparing my own speech for that night, and I said, you know, I got it. I could get him, you know? And I'm saying, well, no, look at this crowd here, you know? Don't do anything stupid, McGovern. And I was like, I don't know if and then I thought, you know, Cindy Sheehan, or Medea Benjamin, they wouldn't be having this conversation there, and they'd be up there, right at the, what kind of a wuss are you, McGovern? And I got up. No, I kid you not. That's what went through my mind. And so, this kind of example, and you know, it doesn't have to be a woman, obviously, but you know, the women are in the forefront of all this, and I think we need to respect that. And that's why I welcome so many women here and show that not only is there great interest, but that you're interested in figure out what to do, not only what to say, the rhetoric. So thanks very much for your attention, and thank you, Donna.